Hi, everyone. It's great to have you here today. Welcome to our NPT PrepCom Consultation Townhall meeting. I'm really excited to be here today and excited to have people joining us. My name is Kim Obergefell. I'm Policy Fellow and Acting Program Manager at BASIC's Inclusive International Security Program. I'm also joined by two other fantastic members of our EVN team, Anahita, who's a policy fellow in the program, and also Declan, who's an intern in our program. So we're here, the full EVN team. It's great to have so many of you here today. So we would like to welcome you to today's Global Town Hall meeting of this year's EVN PrepCom Youth and Early Career Consultation. First, for those that are not EVN members, I'd love to give you a bit of a background of BASIC's Emerging Voices Network. So we're a digital global network of high potential early career researchers on nuclear weapons and nuclear policy issues. Today's early career research on nuclear issues are increasingly geographically dispersed and alarmingly disconnected from each other, particularly in terms of engagement between different regions. So the EVN exists to fill this gap. And since 2020, we've been working on enabling sustained dialogue and facilitating collaborative problem solving between young people and early career researchers in the field. We do this mostly through policy cycles that result in publications, as well as through events and targeted outreach. Now, today, we're here to speak about a current EVN project that is aimed at exploring regional barriers to, as well as opportunities for engagement of early career professionals with the NPT PrepComs and ultimately the overall NPT review process. So with funding support from the Norwegian Ministry for Foreign Affairs, we have 9 early career leaders from 9 different regions around the world that have been acting as EVN youth consultants, gathering information from their respective regions on perspectives on the upcoming PrepCom process. So this town hall is a really great opportunity to voice your regional views and your perspectives, together with the survey that we'll share in the chat a bit later on, and the regional focus group meetings that have already taken place. Your valuable inputs will contribute to the report and the working paper that our EVN consultants are currently drafting. So stay also tuned for our launch event that will likely take place in early June, at which we'll go into a bit more depth on the final reports and final findings of this project. So with this in mind, we're inviting you to speak for 1 to 2 minutes to briefly present your view from your region. And to kick us off, we thought we'll start with our amazing EVN consultants, to give us a brief overview of their findings of their region so far. So feel free, as you're hearing their views, to think about what your perspective is and whether you agree with them, whether you disagree with them, whether there's anything you would like to add to it. And I know that they'll be really looking forward to hear from you as well. So once we've heard from our consultants, we'll then hand over to you. So I'm going to start off with Lucia, who's focusing on Latin America, South America, Central America, Mexico, and the Caribbean. Lucia, if you're here, it'd be great to turn over to you.
Thank you so much. Apologies for being a little late. I'm having some Wi-Fi issues today. But thank you so much for the organizers for this opportunity, first off, and especially to Kim for all her hard work behind the scenes. Just a quick introduction. My name is Lucia Madero. I'm representing the Latin American and Caribbean region. And for those of you who attended the Latin American focus groups, I just wanted to say a huge thank you. You guys were invaluable really in your comments, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from the rest of you. So briefly to touch on some of the points in the region, it's important to mention that the Treaty of the Tlatelolco, which was established in Latin America and the Caribbean, was the first nuclear weapon-free zone, which is a point of pride for our region. However, we've noted that awareness about this and the treaty in general is kind of lacking throughout the region, and that there are important ways to showcase our contributions made to the international disarmament regime through different forms of education. Some of these are being implemented through organizations like OPANAL, and these include like university-wide meetings, as well as conferences. This treaty also plays an obvious and huge role in the nuclear priorities of our region, since we'd like to see more nuclear weapon-free zones, promoting peace and stability throughout the world, as well as maintaining a clear stance in terms of eliminating nuclear weapons, and in particular, Some of the challenges we face are not actually logistical barriers, but political ones, both within Latin America and the Caribbean, like within the states, as much as with other states. So an important point to address will be the fact that there are interpretive declarations tied to our nuclear weapon-free zone treaty, and that this should be addressed in, we hope, a timely manner in order to ensure continued peace, as well as using our regional power to apply pressure on negative security assurances. We think this might be a good time to do that. I look forward to expounding on these points as well as several others in the upcoming paper, and thank you again for your time.
Great, thanks so much, Lucia. Next up is Ananya, who's our EVN consultant on North America. If you'd like to come in.
Yeah, sure. I'd like to echo Lucia's thanks to Kim, Anaita, Declan, and the rest of the BASIC team who have been organizing us so far, and my thanks as well to the members of the North America focus group meeting, whose views really helped to shape so far the working draft. Also just very happy to include any members on the current call who identify as having an association with North America's regions. I'd love to hear your perspectives and incorporate them into the draft paper, either during the call or offline as you prefer. But yeah, just briefly, I wanted to share a couple of interesting observations from our pretty rich discussion, which was that one of our core questions that we were asked to kind of consider for our working paper was whether mainstream nuclear dialogue at a high level represent our region's concerns. And this was kind of complex to address in the North American context, given that our participants kind of agreed that North America's concerns represent generally the US's concerns and are generally in congruence with much of Western Europe's concerns and are thus highly represented in nuclear fora at a high level. However, perspectives of smaller communities within North America who are disproportionately affected by nuclear weapons, colonialism, and climate change are largely absent from the high-level nuclear fora, with the exception of the TPNW. And we said that as settler colonial states, the US and Canada have a particular kind of responsibility or concern for the disproportionate harms of nuclear policy. And this is something that's very much under discussed and not discussed at all in many cases in the NPT context. So gender, youth, climate, and Indigenous rights were focus points of our conversation, and I'm happy to expand on that. But yeah, that was the broad observation, was that even though North America has a disproportionately outsized voice and status on high-level nuclear fora, marginalized communities within North America do not. Thanks very much, and happy to hear thoughts and further reflections on that, or questions, concerns.
Great, thank you, Ananya. That's really interesting. Thanks so much. I think we'll next go to Almuntaso, who's our EVN consultant for Middle East and North Africa, but unfortunately he can't be here today. So my fantastic colleague Anahita will read out his statement that he wrote in place of being here today. Thanks, Anahita.
My pleasure. So as Kim has mentioned, this is on behalf of Almuntaso and the Middle East and North Africa region, also known as SWANA. So he has said that as part of the consultation process for the Middle East and North Africa region, we have mainly looked at concerns, challenges, and opportunities for regional disarmament and non-proliferation. Several of the consultation meetings have been held so far with experts and young professionals, and concerns about new possible proliferators and the absence of international monitoring of Israel's nuclear activities are widely cited. As for priorities, reinforcing the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT, remains among the top priorities from a regional perspective. And to that end, efforts should be focused on achieving the treaty's universality by pushing for Israel to join the NPT and preventing member states such as Iran from leaving the treaty. The Middle East Weapons of Mass Destruction-Free Zone is the most viable solution to disarm nuclear weapons in the region and to prevent further proliferation while securing the right to peaceful uses. Yet, it remains far from realization for political reasons. Nevertheless, it's essential to revitalize this issue and to find innovative ways to engage all regional actors in the process. Promoting dialogue on peaceful uses of nuclear sciences to reduce risks and strengthen the regime could be a starting point. In addition, regional technical cooperation could create incentives for reluctant states and pave the way for enhancing trust between regional actors, whilst reducing secrecy about regional nuclear activities. The remaining consultation meetings will focus on advancing the role of regional civil society in the NPT and ways to create more opportunities for youth and young professionals.
Great, thanks, Anahita. So let's go to Ola, who's focusing on Sub-Saharan Africa next. Ola, if you're in the call, we'd love to hear from you.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. I have an overview of the regional focus group meeting we actually had last week. And if there is one thing, there is the general agreement among the participants on what are the major concerns of what should be the major concerns as far as the NPT PrepCom review conference is all about. What should be the major concerns of countries in sub-Saharan Africa as far as this is concerned. So, but first, there is the need to first understand the fact that what preoccupies diplomats and experts at any major global fora, where disarmament and non-proliferation top the agenda, are concerns that are not peculiar to countries of sub-Saharan Africa. No country currently in the region has the intention to go nuclear, nor does any in the same region possess such capability. This is mainly due, among others, to the region's status as a nuclear weapon-free zone. So, however, the central question here, which is also one of the central questions in the survey, then becomes what remains the primary concerns of countries in the region on the NPT's cardinal goals and the review process. Preliminary findings made mainly from the input of members of the regional focus show that what remains top of the list as far as the region is concerned is exploiting the avenue provided by the NPT's peaceful uses of nuclear science and technology to chart the continental or regional course on energy security. According to a member of the regional focus who indicated anonymity, the continent as well as the region is struggling with industrial growth and economic development, and that the key to solving this is boosting its current energy generating capacity with such capacity that only nuclear reactors provide. How then can this be achieved? It becomes a responsibility of diplomats and experts from the region who need to champion the cause at any available global nuclear fora, such as the NPT Review Conference. According to another member of the regional focus who also indicated anonymity, diplomats and experts who are designated to attend the PrepCom processes, NGOs from the region or that has the interests of the region at heart, such as BASIC, should make efforts and ensure that the PrepCom sessions make this a core issue for the next review conference in 2026. So that is for the energy security issue. Now, another area of concern in the region, according to probably input from the members of the regional focus group, is proliferation of inter and intrastate conflicts involving the youth and children as soldiers or casualties. The scourge of armed conflicts, you will agree with me, in sub-Saharan Africa alone persisted in 2022 and of course early this year. The situation in Mali today deserves attention here because countries who had contributed intervention forces in the country to maintain the peace there under the UN umbrella are withdrawing their forces due to various reasons. So, conscious actions and processes, according to them, to protect young people from participating in and the ill effect of violent conflict and insecurity, and to promote and support their contribution. So the conflict situation represents, according to them, represents a barrier to engagement, according to the feedback I actually got from them. But according to a member of the region, the opportunities for diplomats and experts, and of course for young people from the region, to make disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration a core issue in the 2026 review conference. So these are the, I mean, at the moment, these are the preliminary findings, but these findings exclude suggestions on the way forward on this issue raised. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Sola. Thank you for that overview. We're going to move on to Ilya next, who is focusing on Western Europe.
Thanks, Kim. I'd just like to echo what's been said before. I really want to express my thanks to BASIC and EVN for setting up this really important initiative. And I'd like to give thanks to those who joined the focus group session and have answered the survey. So I just wanted to focus on some of the key issues and priorities that were discussed in the focus group. So one of them was that there needs to be consensus reached on the peaceful uses pillar, as there seems to be some disagreement, particularly within the EU, on nuclear energy's utility in combating climate change. And also there seems to be concern for the security and safety of existing nuclear power plants following the high-profile attack on Zaporizhia. There is, however, a good deal of consensus on pursuing risk reduction measures. And just to perhaps contrast what Ananya was saying, in that North America, particularly the US and Western Europe, seem to be very well represented in high-level nuclear dialogue. The focus group participants thought that actually statements are made, but true dialogue is not happening. And this is one of the barriers to change within the world and within Western Europe. So there seems to be a Cold War mentality, as was said in the focus group discussion, which brings tensions and conflict there. And also within the Western Europe region, there is tension between the TPNW, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, states parties, and NATO members. So those were some of the main themes I was able to tease out there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ilya. Thanks for that overview as well. We're going to move on to Galina, who is going to speak about Eastern Europe and Central Asia. I think we'll just need one more second. Galina, do you want to go next?
Yes, thank you very much. For everyone, my name is Galina Salnikova. I'm from Russia, and I am the consultant for Eastern Europe and Central Asia, echoing all the thanks to BASIC and to people who attended the focus group meeting and to everyone who's here, of course. Briefly on what we discussed at our meeting. First of all, during the research, I kind of realized how diverse the region is. We have one nuclear weapon state, we have a nuclear weapon free zone, we have non-nuclear weapon states, and we also have a crisis situation going on right now in the region. So there's a whole plate of things we need to deal with. What we discussed most of all was a little bit unlike to the Western Europe, is that peaceful uses was recognized by us as the pillar of like more or less agreement, the one that would cause the least controversies during the ongoing review cycle. At least there is no disagreement on like if it should be done or if it should not be done. We all recognized the devastating state of the disarmament pillar in the region and overall. And we all agreed that, unfortunately, we are not really optimistic about the restoration of Russian-US bilateral arms control arrangements, but we hope for the best, of course. Another key challenge we discussed a lot was the lack of public awareness about the issue. And what's interesting that it's different in different kinds of states. So in Russia, for example, public awareness is kind of there. It started growing after the beginning of the Ukraine. But it's more about spreading the hawkish visions of like nuclear weapons being like national pride and something to protect national security of the country, whether in Kazakhstan, for example, in Central Asian nuclear weapon free zone, it's more about whether we should have given up nuclear weapons, going back to history, and at the same time promoting the disarmament pillar. And in other states of the region, it's more about like how can we work with especially NATO countries in the region, like how to protect yourself from the nuclear war, what are the arrangements for NATO in this case, and so on and so forth. So yeah, a change of vision is necessary here, and we want to bring up disarmament education more during the upcoming current review cycle. And of course, another thing we discussed was the infrastructural difficulties some of members of our region experience at the NPT process, like visa constraints to Russian citizens, for example, and many, many more. So we are also discussing that. Yeah, apart from that, we of course touched upon all those different issues of the NPT, and I guess the only thing I would like to add here is that regional cooperation is really necessary in here, and we really highlighted that some kind of regional assistance and capacity building in terms of nuclear security is really necessary because of the crisis situation in Ukraine. And we just hope that during the upcoming and current review process, we'll achieve something, because we, especially the Russian part of the discussion, we're not very optimistic about everything. That's it from my side. Thank you.
Many thanks, Galina, and let's stay optimistic. So perhaps next we'll move on to Anahita again, who will read out Anand's statement. Anand is our EVN consultant for South Asia.
Thank you, Kim. So Anand has also extended his thanks to everyone who's contributed and participated in the regional focus groups. I apologize that he's not here today. So the findings for South Asia's involvement in the nuclear disarmament discourse and with the NPT until now have included several notable aspects. Anand has tried to narrow these down to two major problems and recommendations. The first is that the most obvious problem that they have identified is the limitations to nuclear dialogue due to the non-participation of India and Pakistan in the NPT. These limitations also extend to domestic implications, with the government remaining relatively inactive in nuclear non-proliferation dialogue. Given historical rivalries between India, Pakistan, and China, tensions in the region remain high, with recent cases of border disputes, standoffs, and also cross-border operations. This has raised risks of accidental escalations in the region, with implications to other states who are also majorly affected by some of these tensions. As a recommendation to states parties regarding this, states parties should ideally look for opportunities to bolster engagement of states outside of the NPT into the larger non-proliferation dialogue. This must include dialogues outside of the NPT. However, the Conference on Disarmament also remains deadlocked. In that case, we urge combined efforts to revive special sessions in the General Assembly dedicated to disarmament to use another neutral, acceptable platform to make progress on disarmament towards the South Asia. Secondly, as an extension to this first point, with India and Pakistan's non-participation in the NPT, there is minimal dialogue and fewer incentives for these states to pursue non-proliferation. This also includes concerns over a need for greater efforts and engagement with promoting non-proliferation dialogue in South Asia. To address the problem of limited incentives, states parties could look towards tools of trade and access to nuclear material for peaceful uses. This would address developmental concerns with demand for nuclear energy and technology, whilst also incentivizing states to enter dialogues and efforts. Amid existing tensions, there must also be international mediation efforts into regional risk reduction. And Anand has said that he is also really looking forward to further input on these thoughts to be able to refine some of these preliminary findings for a more kind of informed and inclusive policy paper. Thank you.
Thanks, Anahita. And now, Woo-Yoon, do you want to speak about your region, East and Southeast Asia, please?
Yes, thank you, Kim. First of all, I really appreciate for the BASIC team for organizing such a fantastic initiative and meeting. And second, of course, here are my findings on my region. For my region, East and Southeast Asia, North Korea's nuclear development is making regional security highly complicated. Drawing on my interviews and surveys, many emerging voices think that the current NPT has failed to deal with North Korean problems. North Korea's nuclear weapons are absolutely uncontrollable to Chinese, South Korean, Japanese, and many Southeast Asian governments. So furthermore, as the range, reliability, and number of North Korea's missiles increase, there are many concerns about the nuclear umbrella provided by the United States. So, for example, 2023, very recent poll found that over 70% of South Koreans favor possessing an independent nuclear arsenal. So importantly, there are voices that this option is legal under the current NPT. Like the treaty declares that any member can withdraw the NPT system if extraordinary events related to the subject matter of this treaty have jeopardized the supreme interest of its country. I think it is noteworthy that because of the initial violation of NPT of North Korea, neighboring states such as South Korea and Japan have justification for taking actions which might be connected to the another violations of NPT. So to sum up, our regional voices think that the NPT has failed to deal with North Korean problems from the very beginning, and East and Southeast Asia want to rethink the NPT's standard for its security needs. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Woyun. And last but not least, let's hear from Jenna on her views from Oceania.
Thanks. Hopefully you can all hear me. My name is Jenna and I'm representing the Oceania region. Firstly, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land which I'm joining from, which is the Ghana people, and pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. So in terms of the views from my region, what stood out most is the limited responses that I've had so far. And there could be a number of reasons for this. Geographically, we're quite far away from BASIC's headquarters, and we can often feel disconnected from the discussions about these issues in New York or Geneva. And these kind of discussions often center around nuclear weapon states. And while this region doesn't have any recognized nuclear weapon states, it's a region in which multiple countries have been affected by nuclear weapons testing. And that legacy continues today. It's an issue which hasn't been adequately addressed, and it's not always discussed in relation to the importance of non-proliferation. And in addition to this, as many countries in our region are islands, the secure transport of radioactive material, which is included within the NPT, is also important. So continued engagement with young people from this region needs to be prioritized across think tanks, within NGOs and international forums. We need to assess the barriers to our engagement and participation and address them. And I look forward to everyone else's opinions and perspectives, especially those from this region. Thanks.
Great, thank you so much, Jenna. Thanks so much to all of our EVN PrepCom consultants for kicking off this discussion and definitely giving us something to think about with, such different regions facing such different challenges. I'd love to hear from some of our other participants here today. It'd be great if you can raise your hand. Ideally, if you can, turn on your camera so we can see you. And please remember to state your name and either the country or region you're from, or the country or region you'd like to address in your reaction and in your perspective. So if there's anyone that would like to add anything at this stage, please do raise your hand and we can bring you in then. Perhaps I'll go to Galina first in case you had any immediate
It's a very small comment which I forgot to mention because I got too nervous, but very important one. We also highlighted with the guys in my focus meeting that to achieve some progress at the current NPT review cycle, the perspective of suggestions should be so that you appeal to P5 so that they don't have to sacrifice too much, and that's how we can go forward with the disarmament pillar, at least a little bit, at least on something like that, because disarmament unfortunately is not really reachable right now. But if we find some small points, some suggestion like that, it would be nice. So yeah, looking forward to your comments. Sorry.
No, that's great, Alina. Thank you. Eliza, would you like to go next?
Hi, I hope I'm audible. Yeah. All right, thank you. So my name is Alyssa. I've just recently started to research about nuclear. I'm from Malaysia. So Malaysia, for context, we are a non-nuclear weapon state and a part of the NPT. And I think it's quite interesting looking back at some of the past conferences and how the discussions about nuclear has been going in all regions, I could say. But I think I could give a bit of a comment generally, which is applicable to all states. Perhaps it could be quite interesting to see the analysis, because I think when we discuss about this issue, we always look at from like a nuclear state and non-nuclear state perspective. But I think maybe perhaps for effectiveness, can we also look at the strategies between, major power, middle power, and a small power? Because I think that dynamic could be actually be useful, especially for like certain regions. I could say like for example, I would take my region, Southeast Asia, which like, for example, Indonesia is a part of the G20. I think that type of approach could be very useful to help in basically negotiate. I think in the diplomatic sphere, I mean, like I'm not really good at the nuclear as in the isotopes and things like that. But specifically for my region, I think I would like to address some of the items because like we did a really great analysis, but I think it was heavily dominated by East Asia. Perhaps maybe I think it would be really cool to listen more about Southeast Asia also, because I think although all of us agree upon that we are really concerned about what had happened in North Korea, but I think it was also affiliated with, for example, Malaysia, Singapore, and Indonesia is heavily concerned about AUKUS, which is not really within the spectrum. And I think that's a bit of a, I wouldn't say a flaw, but something that we should bear in mind, because some issues are overlap certain regions. So I think that's something that offers complexity when discussing about these items. Or not, it'll be quite difficult because the theater itself is set in that perimeter. And because we have, like, for example, the SHONFAS, the Southeast Asia Nuclear Weapon Free Zone. So it addressed a lot of concerns, and especially coming from non-nuclear weapon states is something that we should put into consideration. So that's my take on it. Thank you very much, and really great input so far.
Great, thank you so much. Is there anyone else who would like to make any other comments? I see another one. Sophia, would you like to go in?
Sure. Thanks, Kim. And thank you to all the basic team and all the consultants who've shared today. It's been great just to hear the feedback from all of the regions and the thoughts that you guys have shared so far. I'm from the United States, so in the North America region. But I wasn't able to join, unfortunately, the North America focus group, but I do want to just underscore and support everything Ananya shared, particularly both about the overrepresentation of the United States' views, but simultaneously the underrepresentation of smaller communities, particularly Indigenous nations, but also smaller communities that have expressed support for the TPNW through things like the ICANN Cities Appeal. I'll point out that entire states such as California, as well as major cities in the United States, Boston, DC, Los Angeles, have all joined the ICANN Cities Appeal and published statements in support of the TPNW, which is not representative of the United States's view, as a full country, but does represent smaller communities or smaller groups within the United States. But actually, the thoughts that I have been thinking about when we think about barriers to access are not specific to North America. So if I could just share a few thoughts, I think that actually relate cross-regionally and our transnational concerns with barriers to access. And mainly what I'm thinking about when I think about these barriers to access to the overall NPT review cycle, I'm sure we've all discussed visa issues and how difficult it can be and the barriers to access to actually get in person to either the upcoming PrepCom in Vienna or upcoming, all the conferences related to the NPT review cycle. So in thinking about those barriers to access, we often refer to online joining virtually as an alternative, which is definitely a much better alternative than nothing. But there also are barriers to access in how much we can actually access virtually. And I'll note, as I'm thinking about the upcoming PrepCom in August, I'll note that before the PrepCom is the meeting of the working group on strengthening the NPT review cycle, which will be meeting in July. And they've decided that summary records of those meetings won't be shared. So the only documents that will be shared online will be final documents or rules of procedure or the agenda, but summary records of those meetings will not be shared, which is a barrier to access both to pretty much anyone who's not actually able to join in person in Vienna, that working group. And that includes civil society and NGOs, as well as anyone who's not able to make it to Vienna. So that and similar concerns about barriers to access and the lack of documents being shared online is something I'm thinking about as a barrier to access. Another thing that I'm thinking about when I think about barriers to access are related to gender and the discussion that is happening on gender within the NPT review cycle. This obviously was a point of discussion within the last NPT review conference and was included in the not final document in a variety of ways, but there also has not been a huge amount of progress, at least that I've been able to see in points that were included in that non-accepted final document. One of the points that was in that document was a paragraph on everyone endorsing the collection of data on the participation of women. It unfortunately was just about participation of women. This was changed from an earlier paragraph on collecting data disaggregated by sex and gender. But I'd be curious to hear if anyone else has seen this data being published, but I have not seen anything about that data actually being collected or shared widely. Related to this is the ongoing efforts to adopt gender inclusive language, which I know has been an ongoing point of conversation within the Conference on Disarmament, but to my knowledge has thus far not been adopted successfully. So both of these points, gender inclusive language and participation of women or underrepresented gender minorities, obviously are surface level access barriers that don't delve entirely into the depth of the interlink between gender and the nuclear weapons policy, but I think these can be a starting place for deeper analysis of those connections. And those are points where, while the discussion has been started, we're not seeing progress at this point to actually implement either of those.
Thank you so much, Sophia. Yeah, and you make some really interesting points. And I think just quickly touching on, your points on gender and inclusivity as well, that's really something that also, our program and the EVN is really focusing on, and we want to, make sure that just nuclear policy and anything related to the NPT is really just more inclusive of perspectives and voices in this field. So that is definitely something that also us as a network, are trying to work towards. But a very, very important point, yes, indeed. Is there anyone else that would like to make any comments, any other additions? Declan, why don't I bring you in? Please go ahead.
Thanks, Kim. And yes, thanks to Elia for representing our discussion really well in the Western Europe focus group. So I'm from Britain, and I just wanted to add one point as well about the conversation that we had in the focus group about particularly about the divisions in Europe regarding the disarmament and the TPNW in particular, because part of the discussion spoke about the division kind of between regions about this approach and how the nuclear states in Europe were well represented. Their views were well represented globally and in the NPT kind of hierarchy, but that there were several states in Europe who were also very much much more in favor of the TPNW and actually attending TPNW meetings, and that there was a real difficulty for those parts of Europe to be represented, and that there wasn't really a conversation happening, not just between regions, but between states within the Western European region about that. And that there was this kind of block going on at the moment between states who do not want kind of any engagement with the TPNW and those that do. And it was basically stopping a conversation from happening between those states. So, you know, in general, the nuclear states in Europe are well represented, but then those who were not and were not particularly in favor of nuclear weapons weren't as well represented, unfortunately, globally by the NPT regime. So yeah, that's just something I wanted to add from our conversation.
Thanks so much, Declan. And also good to hear from someone who was in one of the focus group meetings that went on earlier before this town hall. Is there anyone else that would like to react to any of perhaps the perspectives that the EVN consultants have shared, or anyone else who would like to make any additional comments? We'd love to hear. Anahita, would you like to go?
Thank you, Kim. I'm Anahita. For those of you I don't know, haven't met yet. I am British Iranian. I think it's important also because I was going to offer some thoughts and like perspectives on the Middle East and North Africa region, but I think it's important to mention that I am a member of diaspora. So of course, like my perspectives are going to be quite significantly impacted by that as well. I found Almantar's feedback really, really interesting. And I would definitely echo his kind of comments about the weapons of mass destruction free zone in the Middle East. I would say that I don't see it just as a solution to getting rid of these weapons, and kind of an end goal, but also much more of a tool for dialogue and a tool for trust building and transparency. I think one thing that we tend to forget is that, you know, especially across varying regions, the political context, as some people have mentioned already, the domestic political landscapes that are taking place really, really impact the way that some of these states are going to come together within the region to talk about an issue like this. We've seen some like quite significant steps forwards and backwards recently in the Middle East region. For example, Saudi Arabia and Iran have resumed diplomatic ties, that kind of thing. And I do see a lot of the work on the zone and the kind of communication and dialogue element of it to kind of be an opportunity to get these states into the into a room at the table and be willing to kind of find areas, not necessarily to make concession and compromise, but to find some kind of like communication and mutual understanding. And if that is done and that kind of it's a much slower process, but if that does take place, I think it can really tackle some of the root issues of the region in terms of kind of getting these states into one room to kind of build more cohesive like regional approaches to the NPT and to nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament in general, not to mention when they then each come into the room of the NPT as their own states. I think that's also really important to say, for example, with the question of Israel as a non-participant, as a state that refuses to engage with the weapons of mass destruction free zone, rather than letting these be quite like significant obstacles. You know, alternative cohesive like regional engagement can really sideline around these issues, but also maybe bring them to less of a significant kind of standstill, and maybe find a way to incentivize Israel to come to the table once they see that the rest of the region is willing to cooperate, if not because of nuclear weapons, for the sake of their own other domestic policy interests. And to build on that, I think, you know, the NPT is quite an unbalanced powered like kind of landscape. It's quite an uneven playing field. So many of these states, when they do step into the room, and this I think goes for like the wider kind of like international arena, some of the language and the notions of almost superiority that can come through from various states towards one another is definitely something that needs to be reckoned with. I think, for example, with nuclear weapon states, they are really influential stakeholders. They do often have quite a larger scope of influence when it comes to the space of the NPT itself. And I think that they would probably benefit from maybe reflecting on some of their responsibilities in terms of the ways that maybe they, for example, if we were going to use an example from the Middle East region, you know, the JCPOA was a big step, but for the Trump administration to withdraw from that, that really did lead to a breakdown of kind of transparency and the effort at trust building that had taken place with a really key state in the Middle East region. And so I do think that also from the other end of it, in terms of how the region is approached by other states, there's a little bit of kind of, I think, inner reckoning and inner reflection that needs to be taken to see what it is about the way that we're trying to approach, you know, states from the region in the current way and the current standard of practice, why it's not working. Something isn't really translating very well. And then to build on that, I think that also speaks not only to those power imbalances, but the fact that, as people have mentioned, the TPNW sits quite far away from the NPT, and there is a very big gap between the two of them. And they have very, very polarizing opinions of one another. And I think some dialogue and some transparent trust building needs to take place between those two treaties as like separate entities to kind of bridge them a little bit more and find mutual ground in between these two quite opposing areas for kind of diplomatic practice. Sorry, I've gone on for a little bit longer, so I will stop there.
Thanks, Anisha, but thanks for your input on that. I'm sure that Al will appreciate that viewpoint as well. Galina, I think you had a comment that you wanted to bring in.
I do. I want to react to several coordinators' reports and, like, in general, some points which caught my attention. First of all, yeah, I totally echo the North American group on underrepresentation of some groups. Navajo Nation came up to my mind like instantly, and those Native Americans who actually suffered from the nuclear testing. And we had like similar discussion with Kazakh participants in my focus group, not about underrepresentation of their views, but what's interesting that in Kazakhstan, for example, the issue of the semi-palatings is one of the core issues of like on which awareness is based. But at the same time, in the region of Kazakhstan, like in that region and neighboring regions only, like it's kind of concentrated. It's not all around the big countries, just like in those smaller regions, which is interesting. Also, very cool point, Wu Yun, sorry if I pronounce your name incorrectly, about the like inefficiency of NPT on like dealing with North Korea. I totally agree, and we see that currently it's going out of hand completely, and that's something that states on their political level need to do. And honestly, restating that North Korea is violating international norms is not really efficient within NPT. Yeah, totally. The thing I wanted to maybe add about growing gaps is the growing gap between nuclear weapon states and non-nuclear weapon states, which is repeatedly recognized, which was repeatedly recognized by Gustavo Zlaunin, the previous president, and people in general. So this is something we also can think about. And the last point to Sophia, she's still there, about the like closed access to the meeting recordings for the working group. To be fair, honestly, looking at the states and like how they approach this working group, I think they decided that just because they themselves have no idea what to expect from this working group, like whomever you ask, they like, we have no idea what's gonna happen there. So I guess they're just embarrassed to like share what's going to happen. But yeah, access to NPT is honestly, I thought it would have been worse, but maybe we can, like, I don't even know how exactly to formulate that, like within the improvement of NPT process framework, or like the final document, or whatever, just like thinking out loud in here. Yeah. End of my comment here. Thank you.
Thanks, Galina. Is there anyone else? Are there any other further comments, any further reactions to anything that has been said so far? Otherwise, Anahita will also add the link to the survey into the chat. So if there's anything else you would like to add in writing later, or you would like to think about a bit more and add into that survey later on, you can follow that link. You can save it for now and fill it in later. The link to the survey, so the survey, the focus group meetings, this town hall meetings, they will all contribute towards the final product that our EVN consultants will write, which will be a report and a working paper that will be submitted to the PrepCom in August. So just stay tuned for our hopeful report launch in early June, and then a later meeting that will be also a virtual meeting at the PrepCom, where we will have a bigger picture view of the key takeaways of that report and that working paper. So thanks so much, I think, for joining. If you have no more comments and no more additions to make at this stage. We'd like to thank you so much for joining and sharing your views and just your contributions on this NPT review process. I think it's really important to emphasize all of those barriers and really articulate both the opportunities, but also the barriers to really engaging, especially for young and early career professionals with the process. So this has been really great and I think has provided quite a good overview of the different perspectives of the regions worldwide. So follow the link to the survey if there's anything else you'd like to add, and stay tuned for when we announce our further activities and events. You can have a look at our basic website and also look out on social media for when we announce anything else. And we really look forward to hopefully having you at one of those events, potentially the report launch in early June. So thank you so much for joining today and hopefully until soon. Thanks.